event this evening and making the time to be here with us and some great speakers that we have. So my name is Sarah Loas, and I'm just going to be emceeing this evening. And I'm with an organization called Toronto Alpha, which stands for Association for Learning and Preserving the History of World War II in Asia. And today we're so honored to have the opportunity to listen to and learn from Lola Fidencia David, the last living survivor of Japanese military sexual slavery in Manila, and Cristina Lope Rosello, a Filipina therapist who helps survivors cope with the trauma of the past. And both Fidencia and Cristina are here visiting from the Philippines and are coming from several other events in Toronto as well as in Winnipeg before that. So this evening we're just going to begin with an introduction about an overview of the history, the context, openly about complexities and asking some tough and critical questions that maybe the vocabulary for change can emerge and develop. So I'm so happy that you are all here with us today, and I look forward to the conversation. So first I'll ask Judy.
Just a point for clarification. I'm promoting my book, not just my personal ends, but part of the proceeds goes to the Comfort Women. Personally, I am a volunteer resident psychologist. She belongs to a group called Lola's Campañera, which is headed by Nelia Sancho. The book had funding, but not a single cent went to me. So I had to publish it on my own, and I worked for 3 long years. Just so this book will come out. Okay, the reason for documenting the stories of the Comfort Women from a psychological perspective, which has never been done before, is simply this. I stand out as a voice in the wilderness because when I was first asked to volunteer in handling enduring impact of war in 1996, I already noticed that the campaign focused on compensation, restitution, and not very much on rehabilitation. My point is, if you there were cases filed against the Japanese imperial government as being culpable. My position here is this. From a legal perspective, because I work as a clinical psychologist, I'm working closely with lawyers because I'm working in the area of domestic violence. And I testify in court as an expert witness. So I have some idea of what the law would be in terms of evidentiary, procedural justice and all that. And I was telling some of my colleagues that if we just go by what happened during the war, not legally, the government of Japan will answer and say, look, we have the San Francisco Treaty. We already gave reparations to your government, and that treaty indicates that you cannot ask any further damages. So my point is, for the 50-year silence that these women suffered, there was psychological, economic, emotional abuse, and that the legal track should be along the post-war enduring damages. I was not heard, I was not listened. And that was the reason why I left Lila Filipina and campaigned in the International Criminal Court, bringing the Comfort Women experience to end impunity in future wars, to curb it so that the Comfort Women experience will never be repeated. And with a host of other women's rights advocates, we were able to put wartime rape as crime in the ICC statute. We were able to fight against ethnic cleansing and a host of other, and we were able to promote for the inclusion of gender justice and a lot of victims' rights articles one of which was Article 75 on reparations. Now, another colleague of mine took a hard line, and she, all throughout the UN Preparatory Committee meetings, she was forever embarrassing the government delegation on the issue of the comfort women. And indeed, she took a hard line. The Japanese delegation also took a hard line. On the last day, before we were all proceeding to Rome for the plenipotentiaries meeting, the Japanese delegation stood up and said, we defeat Article 75, which is on reparations. It was a major setback to all of us. So immediately, I applied for a visa to Japan and spoke in a series of media presentations. I said that it was not fair for Japan to have this article deleted because just because they don't have reparations in their domestic court, because this is going to deprive future other governments and future wars from ever looking into the plight of victims. Okay? The ICC is a court of distinction because it is the first time that individual culpability. In other words, with the ICC, we can go as high as emperors, presidents, heads of states. This is the beauty of the ICC. Anyway, back to the comfort women. I have always maintained that position that the legal track should be one not focusing on compensation and state apology. We should focus in terms of campaign on state apology and state compensation, but we should not just limit it to that. We should also talk about post-war rehabilitation and guarantees of non-repetition. It's quite personal. When I was 5 years old, I had a nanny. I was born in Leyte, where one of the worst naval battles in the Leyte Gulf happened during the Pacific War. And in Tacloban, where I was born, 10 years later, I had a nanny. And she would tuck me to bed. And she would tell me, she would talk to the wall, she would narrate how she was raped, captured, repeatedly raped, and how her father's head was cut off, how her mother was violated, and how she survived, the only one in the family. I was a little girl lying there. She didn't know that I was awake and listening to the story like a recorder. Okay? I didn't know. There was no term military sexual slave at the time. No term, nothing to describe their experience. So I carried this anger with me all throughout. You know, my mother would say, of 1 million children, you're one. Because I would be in the street, if I see a woman being shouted at or punched at, I would go approach and mediate and really take the woman's fight. And my mother thought something was psychologically wrong with me. Anyway, martial law was declared in our country in 1972, and I was one of those young people in the University of the Philippines who just have to take on national democratic goals. Because that was, you know, that was the call of the times, and still is the call of the times. And there were atrocities, like what the Lolas suffered. But these atrocities, you don't speak out. I never even thought I'd be able to speak out about these atrocities that were done to young women like this, because during the time it was basically you have a core in organizations, and I was one of those. Learning, I was still learning. Anyway, to cut a long story short, because of what happened to me during martial law, which I couldn't speak out, I shifted from chemistry to psychology to better understand, because I was exhibiting post-traumatic stress disorder. And it would take, 15 years later, when I was accidentally called to counsel the comfort women, because they were raped and they would break down and they're asked to speak about their experience. And when I saw them in one room, about 60 of them, I really cried. It was only then that I made a connection between my experience as a child with my nanny and my own experience in martial law. And you know, it's like this. People would always say, she's Cristina, she's the clinical psychologist, she helps the comfort women. But no, I was a wounded healer. Okay? It's not true that I'm helping them. It's these women who helped me make meaning of my own victimization. It was them who made me understand my childhood, my anger, and even the war stories that I heard during breakfast from my parents. They were educators who turned guerrilla workers, fighters. And from them, there was some value to all of this trauma. I learned from the comfort women, I learned that in spite of all the painful things that I've undergone, on a person-to-person interaction, because I told you I'm basically not the political upfront popular figure. I'm the one behind, just working quietly, rehabilitating them. The capacity to love. That's why I was crying when Joy was talking, because these women experience the worst atrocities I can ever imagine. Yet, the capacity to love, you know, if you're in a person-to-person relationship with them, how they can make you, just sitting together, how they can make you feel loved, cared for, appreciated. You know, it's all there. So it's not true that I'm the healer. I am healer and healed, and the Lolas are also healers and the ones healed. It's a two-way interaction.